James, when you started hosting Football Weekly, did you ever expect you'd be playing to stadiums?
No, I think it's probably the fairest answer there. No, when I started hosting Football Weekly, it was pretty much the first time I'd heard of a podcast. I mean, in any kind of real practical sense, and I was convinced that it was a terrible idea, but kind of did it anyway because I was writing for The Guardian and they wanted to do it. So I said, okay, yeah, I can do that. But yeah, I really didn't think that it was going to become something that would find an audience the way that it has. So, 10 years, 11 years on now, I'm still sort of constantly happily surprised by it all.
Yeah. What do you put the success down to?
The fact that there was an area of people, a kind of part of the football-loving public that hadn't really been catered for, I don't think, in the way that football was being presented or discussed, certainly in the UK. The kind of attitudes, I think the way that things were being done before, it fallen into a certain formula, which obviously worked for some, and that's why it kept being used. But there were a large number of people who didn't think of football in that way or want to hear it described in that way, who maybe, didn't think of it in quite the same, well, had a slightly more irreverent approach to it all, I guess you might say. And I think the other thing is that because the broadcasting landscape has changed and the way that people can watch football and experience football has changed, whether because travel's easier or because you can see stuff from all over the world more easily now. The fact that the broadcasting world has changed, that it's really opened up with things like podcasting and blogging and just making it a much more democratic exercise. I think that it's just basically empowered that whole area of football fandom, as it were, to find themselves as a community. And we've been quite fortunate in that we were there kind of at the start of that and seem to have kind of had a common voice with a lot of those people. Plus, it's free,
That's a good selling point, all right. James, we asked loads of our listeners to send in questions, and a lot of them centred around the question I kind of really wanted to ask, and probably one of the cornerstones of the podcast success, and they're your puns. Basically, most people want to know, James, whether we assume that you write them. How long does it take you to write them, and which ones stick out? Because we've got our own favourite couple here.
Oh well, I couldn't possibly. I'd be like Sophie in Sophie's Choice. But in terms of writing them, it's me that does that. How long it takes to write a pun? I mean, I'm not sure if you can set out to do. You can actually a little bit, because if you've got two things like a football match and Donald Trump, you think, okay, Donald Trump's topical and there's been a football game. What areas, what words intersect? What are the nexi, if you like? Also, what's the loci in that Venn diagram of vocabulary that you can use to kind of send people one way and then it turns out you're talking about the other, which is what I think a lot of puns are about. So, yeah, you can take that slightly mechanical approach to it all, but most of the time I think puns for any of us are just things that kind of occur to you when, you're thinking about something else, and then the two kind of a synapse flares somewhere, and you realise there's a double entendre. I mean the pun thing is a funny thing. I mean, it's largely based on the fact that I've got zero kind of football and analytical skills to offer, so I just used to kind of make puns and stuff, and that's remained very much my contribution.
Yeah, we said you were on the show today, and we were bombarded with the line. Stephen Ireland's had more stiff nans than a dodgy Indian restaurant, which
right.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean that was certainly one of mine. I'm not sure what my favourites would be, but certain ones, I must admit, I'm a bit shameless, and certain ones do get used again and again. Were there any others?
There was that. I remember my own personal favourite was when Liverpool lost to Sunderland. It was that beach bowl goal. And you said that Liverpool denied by something red, round and overinflated, and for once it's not Alex Ferguson's head. which
Right.
which is pretty good.
Right.
There was lots of other around Euro 2012 and Ireland's kind of audacious limits at that tournament, but we try not to discuss Euro 2012 too much in this podcast because we try to repress the memory as best we can. To take you back, like obviously Football Weekly's a huge success, and the other huge cult success before that was obviously Football Italia on Channel 4. Can you maybe talk to us firstly how you got involved with it, James?
How did I become involved in it?
Yeah.
Well, I spoke Italian. There was a kind of weird combination of events. I was following Italian football because I was going out with this girl from Rome, and also I was just kind of interested in it because it was so new at the time. I mean, this was kind of the start of the 90s, and satellite TV had just started, and on one of the channels in England, you could see this kind of funny stuff with people from long hair playing in sunshine, with long hair playing in sunshine and all these kind of glamorous locations. And I got quite excited about it. And then I started going out with this girl from Rome and learned Italian. And at the same time was sharing a flat with somebody whose friend worked for the company that was making the documentaries about Paul Gascoigne. And when he finally, after 18 months of injuries, was due to come back to football, and it was going to be in Italy, that same company went to Channel 4 and said, listen, we need to get the rights to this. It turned out they had to buy the whole league to do so. So Channel 4 went, yeah, let's do that. And because of a really happy combination of circumstances, one was the fact that it was that same summer that Sky took Premier League off ITV, so most people couldn't see any live football apart from the Italian stuff. And secondly, the fact that we just had that World Cup in Italy, which everyone in England had done quite well in, Ireland had been involved in, and I think there was a huge amount of kind of warmth and like a slightly nostalgic feeling about Italy and its stadia. And the third thing, which is kind of big, was the fact that at that point, Serie A was clearly the best football league in the world. All the best players were there, and it was very much the place. And that fed into the Gascoigne narrative a bit, because certainly in England, people were really curious to see how he could fare, having had an excellent World Cup, how he would fare against very much the world's best. So it's those things, I think, put together that made it such a big draw. Oh, plus, I was saying about that area of kind of football supporters who hadn't really been catered to by the various programs we'd had in England before. I mean, way back in '92, I think the approach to broadcast was more traditional than it was when, say, our podcast started. And we certainly had a very different approach on Football Italia. The guys who put it together were very keen to not have people involved who have been working on other shows, with the exception of Kenneth Worsonham. I wasn't a massive fan of The Big Match or anything like that, or Match the Day, or that way of doing things. I mean, it just wasn't something that interested me particularly. So I think that it was kind of a very different thing.
Did you ever imagine it would go on to be the success it would be, or does that ever cross your mind when you're first put in front of the camera? Way back in...
Sorry, did I ever imagine that what?
It would go on to be the success that it ultimately turned out to be.
No, well, Italian football was a big deal, but would I make a career out of it? No, I thought probably quite the opposite. Football fans can be quite aggressive. Can be quite aggressive in their criticism of people who are on telly talking about football. There's the kind of reactions that, I don't know, Robbie Savage or Michael Owen get these days. And I must admit, having been offered the job to go and talk about football in Italy, I was pretty convinced that I would be back home within weeks with my tail between my legs. So as soon as people actually heard me opening my mouth and spouting off about it.
We're obviously delighted it didn't work out like that. I had a look through some of the writing of Football Italia just before I rang you, and a couple of lines stuck out, and one on Football 365. Football Italia, it was the first intelligent, erudite and informed and funny show about football and television. And Sean Ingle with The Guardian says that Football Italia proved that intelligence and irrelevance were not magnetic opposites. Did you really feel like that was something you were trying to prove when you were involved?
No, I mean, it's really common when people say stuff like that. A lot of people have warm memories of that program, which might be due to the fact that they were a lot younger in those days. I mean, there's stuff that I can remember from when I was younger that I'm not sure how well it would stand up these days. I think they were intelligent people making the program, and hopefully I could get included in that group. But it wasn't like we kind of set out to prove a point or anything. I think that to an extent, it was as much about making sure that we would enjoy watching ourselves as anything else. And as I say, the conditions were all there to make a successful show. We had the best football. We had the best English player for generations. We had a wonderful backdrop. I mean, it couldn't have been better. All those piazza and wonderful locations in Italy that we were filming amongst. And we had the absence of competition because the Premier League had just started and had done one to satellite TV. So, it was all there for us, and we kind of kicked into an open goal in that sense. They were all smart people making it, and they just made a program that I guess didn't assume too much stupidity in the part of the viewer, and off we went. I mean, it's nice. I do appreciate why people look back on it fondly, because it's always nice when someone doesn't kind of underestimate your intelligence. And I always appreciate that in a program. So I'm delighted that people feel we didn't do that either.
Yeah, I have a theory. If you let me indulge it for a minute, and then you can kind of disabuse me of it as quickly as you want. I feel that your work with Football Italia and Football Weekly has kind of raised the standards of what football fans expect when they see football discussed on television, and particularly in television around analysis of games. And that level of demand from the viewer that's quite informed means the likes of Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville on Monday Night Football, they really have to up their game, and obviously they do, and they produce a very good show. And maybe that's why Michael Owen and Robbie Savage's kind of inanity gets so much criticism. I've realised that's not much of a question, but
well, it's a lot better than some of my answers. But I would say that that's very flattering of you. I don't know if we particularly had much to do with that. I think that it's been interesting with the way that things like the internet have really expanded people's ability to talk and make themselves pundits, as opposed to just being on the receiving end of punditry through blogging or podcasts or whatever it is. And that, as much as anything, has raised the game, because rather than there being this kind of small cabal of ex-pros who were allowed to opine on football and an audience, and now pretty much anyone can do it. And possibly that has made people realize that they need to be a little bit sharper to get clear of the hubbub of voices. As regards Neville or Carragher, then it's phenomenal what they do. They have a lot of time to do it in. They have a lot of technology to do it with. Yeah. Both of which are things that you didn't get, I guess, in football programs back in the 80s, because there wasn't a dedicated sports channel. And that's not to take anything away from Gary Neville's analysis and Carragher's analysis, which is excellent, and indeed the editorial decision-making behind that, which, again, is very much about saying, no, the viewer doesn't just want to see the goal from 16 angles. They want to know about why a team wins, why a team gets into that position, all the stuff that maybe a pro can understand, but needs to be broken down or played at that level. So I think that there are tremendous things going on, and watching football now is a dream compared to what it was like back in the 80s. If we made any contribution to that, that's terrific. But I really don't think we've been the driving factor amongst them. We just threw in some puns along the way, that's all.
James, I'm going to ask you for your favourite memories from Football Italia. This is a loaded question that really asks, when did things go wrong?
When did things go wrong?
Yeah, if anything ever went wrong in live television, as
I
it's prone
see.
to
Right? Yeah. Well, things went wrong quite a lot. I mean, in the early years, any attempt to hook up with Paul Gascoigne to film his bits of the show were always doomed to failure, but not particularly comic failure, more just sort of sat in the car or stood on a piece of tarmac waiting around failure. In terms of stuff going wrong, the riot outside Genoa Milan, when I got kind of waylaid by a group of Genoa fans who wanted a tape containing footage of them attacking Milan fans. The tape being in a car which was with the crew who were driving off in the opposite direction, having left me behind. That was probably about as wrong as it got. But most of it just kind of went away. And if it didn't, it was all right, because we did the games live, but Gazzetta was always kind of filmed during the week, and then we stuff that. So things didn't work out.
Yeah, with the Genoa fans, sorry, James, did they want the tape with the evidence on it back off you so they could pulp it?
Yeah, basically what happened was, it was a terrible day. I mean, I'd say things went badly. I mean, it went fatally wrong for one Genoa fan, Vincenzo Spagnuolo. This is kind of mid-90s. He got stabbed and killed by some visiting Milan fans before a Genoa-Milan match that Channel 4 happened to be covering live. The word of this kind of filtered around the ground, and by half-time, the fans had let the players know that there's no way that they should be continuing, and the players agreed. So the game was suspended. We stayed on in the stadium because Channel 4 had a live slot to film. They just went to coverage of another game, and we stayed there so that we would wrap the program up at the end once the other game had finished. And once that happened, we then went outside, and there was a major confrontation going on because the Genoa fans now wanted to seek some kind of retribution from the visiting supporters. They were all holed up on one end of the ground. The police were forming a ring around that area to try and get them out eventually. And I kind of very naively went, I'm sure we're going to be talking about this in next week's show. I'll try and get some footage with our camera. So I sent the cameraman to film why I did this, and why didn't I just think, we'll get it off the newsfeed? I don't know. But anyway, so I said, well, you go and film some stuff. I was aware of the fact that the fans were unlikely to welcome, any kind of publicity for what they were up to. So I did tell the cameraman, look, just film like over their shoulders towards the police. So you see the stadium with the police kind of ringing it, that kind of thing. But the cameraman was quite an artistic fellow, and having got one or two angles, he felt, no, I think I can get a better shot from over there, and then maybe a shot from over there wouldn't be dramatic if we saw the fans doing this. So he disappears out of sight. And then about 5 minutes later, he comes back walking extremely briskly with a kind of growing crowd of people behind him, walking slightly more briskly. And just about the point that he gets to me, they kind of knock the camera off his shoulder, at which point he and the sound man just jump into the car that I'm standing next to and drive off. At that point, I feel a wallop, and a fist is connected in no uncertain terms with my face. I turn around, and there's this big guy saying, "Where's the tape? Give me the tape." And I kind of motion at the car, which is kind of busy speeding towards the first route out. And so there's basically a ring of Genoa fans who are now extremely unhappy with me. But the funny thing was, at this point, I kind of put on my best kind of doe-eyed, I'm so sorry I haven't done my homework face, and said, no, I'm English. And they immediately, the whole situation just changed in an instant. They were, oh my goodness, so don't want to get you out of here. One of the ultras was delegated to kind of accompany me out of what by now was a little bit like a war zone with kind of smashed out police cars and that. And he kind of accompanied me out, kind of making polite small talk along the way about Genoa, and stuck me in a taxi, and off I went. So yeah.
Goodness
sorry, you were after a kind of a slightly more light-hearted kind of anecdote.
That's all right.
But yes, that's one that springs to mind.
Goodness me. Just like maybe a happier memory of Italy. Francesco Totti actually announced in the last hour or so that he's retiring. Did you ever come across him, James?
Francesco Totti?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yes. Well, yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, he's just announced his retirement, or his retirement has been announced for him, perhaps, more accurately. But he was playing almost as soon as our show started. I think 93, 94, he made his debut for Roma. And extraordinary statistic that this season, I think something like 33%, almost a third of all the players in Serie A weren't even born when he made his debut. So, along the way, living in Rome and doing the show, there were a couple of occasions, when we go along and get an audience with Francesco Totti, and he was always a very genial fellow. Not to be fair, the most interesting of interviews, because the whole kind of the more entertaining aspect of his public persona came kind of afterwards. I think when with Ilari Blasi's kind of arrival and that whole kind of realization that he could play upon this idea that he was, I wouldn't say a little bit simple, but yeah, certainly not the sharpest of footballers. And they kind of made a little bit of an industry out of that with his books, all the money of which went to very good causes, and various other things. But no, he was a really pleasant chap, a massive figure. It was clear, but even then, this is kind of mid-90s for some icebergs, and that he was very much the centre of everything at that club. And I think it's remarkable when you look at, I don't know, you could say Wayne Rooney, for example, who's almost 10 years younger than him, how Totti has been able to evolve as a player, not just in terms of the way he's lived his life, his conditioning, but also the way that, tactically he's approached football, the way that he's remained relevant. Maybe not this season, but last season. He played a huge role in Roma's campaign, approaching his 40s. I think it's just a testament to the fact that whilst he was always depicted as this like bimbo d'oro, this kind of like golden, this happy child almost. That he is actually, in football terms, a very, very intelligent man, and an absolute legend.
Yeah,
some of the goals he scored. He's I don't know. I was thinking the other day actually, because one of the things about Totti obviously is the fact that he is a bandiera. He's never left Roma. He's Roma through and through. He was a ball boy at the European Cup. Well, he was certainly there to see the European Cup defeat to Liverpool back in the 80s. And there's all this kind of mythology about him and how much he represents the club. And he never left even when Real Madrid came calling or Milan came calling. It's fabulous. But part of me really regrets that we didn't get to see him at a Real Madrid. And I know it's almost heretical to say that, but it would have been fascinating to see how his career would have evolved, and maybe how appreciation of him would have spread even further had he been placed in a different context, and what it would have brought out of him as well. Because with the best will in the world, Roma have been a performing club for too many of his seasons. And it's been a shame almost it's a little bit like having a masterpiece and hanging it in a slightly unlit, slightly unfrequented back room of a gallery.
Yeah, just to take you back to something you said there a minute ago, I'm a little bit ignorant of it.
Yeah.
You said that they almost made a little industry after a few years out of him not being having the greatest depth of intelligence.
No, he became a massive figure off the field as much as on it. Things like his marriage to Hillary being televised live, but also a series of, and I don't think there's a footballer in Italy who's appeared in as many adverts as Totti, and generally playing the same kind of genial, slightly cheeky buffoon, for whom things tend to always work out all right. But the main thing that happened was that, as I say, he had this reputation for not being the sharpest of individuals. And they released a 1 and 2 and I think 3 in the end, joke books, jokes about Totti, which were all done for charity. And he put these together himself, or certainly gave them his name and his approval. And they would all be kind of things like, he walks in with his jigsaw puzzle and says to Hillary, darling, I'm so excited. I finished my puzzle. It only took me 3 weeks, and it says 3 to 4 years on the box. But yeah, that's very much the level it's fished at. But anyway, it's a lovely sign that he can, indulge in such self-deprecation for a good cause.
We threw our social media open to a few readers' questions. If you don't mind me throwing it at you now, James.
Sure, yeah.
Garrod Rafferty says, AC Jimbo strikes me as one of the most intelligent men on football television in Britain. Will he tell us what's on his bookshelf?
On my bookshelf, there are, in football book terms, there's Calcio by John Foote, which I regard as an excellent, an encyclopedic account of the many stories that have happened along the way in football's rise in Italy. Along with that, there are lots of books, really. I mean, were I in front of it now, I could read some out. Good Lord, I've drawn a blank because I'm not actually in front of it right now. Some history books, lots of kind of vaguely dyspeptic books about the kind of Paul Auster variety, which I'm read for a while. Some more kind of warmly humanist things like Kurt Vonnegut and that. Lots of that Robert Harris fellow whose Roman trilogy I really enjoyed. But yeah, lots of books and some various kind of curious objects which seem to have found their way into my house over the years. And that's about it. Probably some candles, I'm thinking.
Mitch Lindsay wants to know, why the big desserts, Jimbo? We assume that's a reference to Football Italia and not that he's shadowing your every meal.
Yes. I mean, I was kind of dimly conscious of the fact that Football Italia was kind of selling something beyond the football, and part of what it was selling was that whole notion of Italy and sunlit piazza and lovely locations and glamorous passers-by, but also wonderful ice cream. So the guy who was the producer said at the start, listen, we think we should have a little section which is just going to be about the big stories, but we don't have any money, so we're not going to get any footage or anything. Can you just get the newspaper and hold that up? Just kind of have a pile of newspapers, go to a cafe or something. And he basically just invented this genre. He said, just go to a cafe, somewhere nice, and just sit there and kind of hold some papers up and tell us what's in the stories. And so, given that most places you point a camera in Italy look pretty sensational, that all worked out pretty well. We did that, and sitting in these places, we wanted to dress the table nicely, so we tended to get the biggest, most exciting dessert possible, and it would sit there, and often it would melt, and we'd have to get another one. But the great tragedy of this is that so rarely, because of the kind of filming schedule, did I have the time to sit and enjoy it. And in fact, if I had my time again, were I to go back and relive the whole experience, I think the biggest change that I would make would be to actually just sit and have the desserts.
One final question, because we've kept you way too long. Loads of people asked
not at all.
Paul Kenny, and I'll give Paul Kenny the name drop, but loads of people asks your favourite footballer from the Football Italia years. Favourite Italian footballer, I assume.
Yeah, no, it's a tough question because there was so many greats. I had Totti because of a Roma fan, Signor because he was such a smashing bloke. Obviously, things worked out a little bit more darkly for him. Zola later on. It tended to be more that kind of player because Mancini, I loved to watch Mancini play as well. But the player... And then there were other funny ones like, I don't know, Dario Hubner and Igor Protti, who was the most unlikely of kind of goal-scoring heroes for Bari down in the south. But it has to be, and this is going to be the least interesting answer I could possibly give you, but it has to be Roberto Baggio because there's something quite remarkably other about Baggio. There's something really that, for me, puts him in a completely different category to all other footballers that I've ever seen in any other country, or in any country. Obviously supremely gifted with the football at a time when we really weren't used to seeing the footballers do that kind of thing. But as a person, whether because of his kind of interesting mindset, his kind of Buddhist philosophy, or just there was something about him that he was so special. And the most, the biggest day for me on Football Italia were times when I got to meet Baggio, and I had a couple of those in the first season. Somebody stuck one of them up on YouTube the other day, and it's quite hilarious. So there's me kind of with hair, trying to sound posh, meeting him in his clothes shop up in Caldogno, up in sort of near Vicenza in the northeast of the country. And there's a kind of like twinkling wisdom, but an enigmatic twinkling wisdom to him that, in his, in terms of his philosophy, that suggests that this isn't his first rodeo, but he doesn't speak a lot, and he doesn't really say anything all that interesting. I thought Vialli was always a much more interesting incident, but at the same time, there was just a charisma about him that was just knockout. Whether it's just because, we'd all seen him playing football in a crazy fashion, as a result, thought he was special, but it just always felt special with Baggio.
Great. But
actually, on a one-to-one basis, if I was to sit down and have dinner with anybody tomorrow, it would be Nicola Berti.
Okay.
Nicola Berti, the midfielder, Inter, and the great Italy side of the early 90s.
Just because he's entertaining?
Oh, sorry, why? Because he is a tremendously funny man and really, really warm, charming individual. Was very kind to us when I first arrived, like my first season there, 92, 93. He kind of took me under his wing a bit, would introduce me to players and that kind of thing, and say, hey, Chotos, could actually come over and talk to this bloke, and just generally be a nice guy. But also, I mean, he cracked it. He had this reputation as a kind of good time fellow, that he basically, if there were parties and stuff going on, it would all be at Nicola's. But so I don't think anyone, certainly his public image wasn't being a particularly shrewd individual, but after he retired, I read this interview with him where he basically explained that when he got his first paycheck as a player, he realized, my goodness, that's a lot of money. If I handle this right, I never need to work again. So he basically put enough money aside that now he lives, well, certainly the last time I heard of him, he was living 6 months of the year in Milan and 6 months of the year in the Bahamas and just sailing his yacht. And that's his life because he put enough money aside to do it. So he's a guy who knows how to make the right choices. And I think it would be interesting to catch up with him.
Yeah, and he also might pay for dinner. James, thanks so much for taking the time to chat to us.
Not at all, Gavin.
To us.
Not at all, Gavin.
To us.
Not at all.